It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that passes unnoticed by the world, but for Emily Carter it would mark the moment her life quietly cracked open. She had been serving tables at Maggie's diner for 6 years, memorizing faces, orders, and fake smiles like clockwork. Most customers blurred into each other, but the man at table 9 was different. He sat alone, head bowed over a tattered Bible, wearing a worn leather jacket and an expression too peaceful for this noisy world. Emily didn't recognize him at first, not until a teenage girl gasped behind her, whispering, "That's him, Jesus from The Chosen." Fame didn't faze Emily, but what she found scribbled on the check after he left. Even words written in scratchy ink would bring her to her knees in the walk-in freezer, tears streaming down her face. Emily Carter was tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, but the kind that settles in your bones when life just stops making sense. Her shift had started at 10 a.m., same as always. The coffee machine hissed like a feral cat. Bacon sizzled behind the counter. A crying toddler clung to a juice. Sticky high chair. Same noise, same mess, same wear and tear customers. She had stopped hoping for surprises. Surprises, she'd learned, usually meant car trouble, rent increases, or phone calls from her ex. But the man at table 9 didn't feel like trouble, not exactly. There was something different in the air when he walked in, like a breeze you feel before a summer storm. He didn't demand attention. If anything, he tried to disappear. But people noticed him. It wasn't his face, not at first. It was his peace. He ordered black coffee and oatmeal, then spent most of his time reading. Emily refilled his mug without asking. She liked the quiet ones. He nodded, said thank you, polite, soft-spoken, simple. It wasn't until a teenage girl from a nearby booth squealed to her friend, "It's Jonathan Roumie from The Chosen," that Emily finally placed him. She'd never watched the show. Faith hadn't been her thing since her mom died. But she'd seen clips on TikTok, that kind, dyed actor who played Jesus. Now he was sitting in her section, tipping his mug toward her like any other man. She brought his check without ceremony. "No rush," she said. He smiled. "Thanks, Emily." She froze. Did I tell you my name?" He nodded toward her name tag. "It's a good name." When she returned 10 minutes later, the table was empty. His plate was clean. The check was under the salt shaker. She didn't notice anything strange until she picked it up. The receipt was paid, cash with a generous tip. But something else was there too. 7 words written in black ink. "You're seen, you're loved, you're not forgotten." At first she didn't react, just stared. The handwriting was plain, almost rushed, but something in it felt personal, as if the note hadn't been written for the sake of kindness, but out of knowledge, out of truth. Emily read it again and again. Her hands began to shake. She stumbled into the walk-in freezer, shut the door behind her, and finally let herself cry, because she had felt forgotten. Ever since her mom's cancer diagnosis, the long nights at the hospital, the silence after her prayers went unanswered, she'd slowly stopped believing that God saw her at all, that anyone did. She smiled for tips, laughed at rude jokes, tied her hair up and pretended she didn't care that the life she'd dreamed of had shriveled into survival. But those 7 words hit a nerve so buried, she didn't know it was still alive. She slid down against the cold metal shelf and pulled out her phone, searching. Jonathan Roumie note to Waitress. Nothing. Jonathan Roumie Waitress diner message. Nothing. It wasn't a PR stunt. It wasn't on camera. It was real, and somehow he had known. The note didn't quote scripture. It didn't mention Jesus, but it carried the same weight. The same warmth she remembered from childhood bedtime prayers and whispered lullabies. Her mom used to say, "God sees you, Em, even when the world forgets." She hadn't heard those words in years, until now. She folded the receipt and placed it inside her apron pocket like it was a relic. Her cheeks still wet, her breath still fogging in the freezer air, she whispered a prayer she hadn't dared utter since the funeral. "God, Was that you?" No answer came in words, but something shifted in her chest. A loosening, a flicker of belief. Later that night, after the diner closed, she sat in her car with the receipt in her hand, staring at the words again. The street lamps made halos on her windshield. "You're seen. You're loved. You're not forgotten." Was it just a kind gesture, coincidence, or something more? She didn't know. But something inside her had changed, and she wasn't going to let it go. "Would you like me to? I can write it immediately, continuing Emily's journey, or introduce a new angle depending on your plan." Emily didn't sleep that night. She tried. She turned off the lamp, pulled the blankets up to her chin, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. Her fingers clutching the folded receipt like it might dissolve if she let go. She had placed it on her nightstand, and then under her pillow, then finally held it tight in her palm like a child with a secret. Morning came like a whisper through her blinds, and when she finally rose, it wasn't from rest. It was from something else entirely. Something unsettled, something stirring. She didn't know what the note meant, not completely, but the peace it brought hadn't left. She drove to work early, the roads still damp with last night's rain, her radio off, her thoughts loud. At the diner, she poured herself a coffee before the first bell above the door rang. No customers yet, just the hiss of the griddle, the clink of dishes, and her own reflection in the scratched-up bathroom mirror. And that's when she saw it, written in red lipstick on the mirror, just above the sink where she washed her hands every morning, were the exact same words from the check. "You're seen, you're loved, you're not forgotten." She froze. The lipstick wasn't hers, the handwriting wasn't hers. She looked around like someone might jump out and say it was a prank, but the bathroom was empty. Her heart pounded. She felt exposed, not in a scary way, but in the kind of way that made her feel known, like someone had been paying attention. She wiped her hands slowly and backed out of the bathroom, unsure if she should tell anyone. What would she even say? Hey, did someone leave a divine message in cosmetics on the mirror? The cooks would laugh her out of the kitchen, so she said nothing, just stared at the message again when she walked by, and again, and again. By noon the place was buzzing. Tourists, truckers, locals. No sign of Jonathan Roumie, no sign of anything miraculous, but Emily couldn't unsee the message. It lingered in her mind even while she poured coffee and scribbled down orders for blueberry pancakes and extra crispy bacon. And then, during the lunch rush, something else happened. A little boy at table 5 dropped his chocolate milk. The glass shattered, brown liquid sprayed across the table, and his mother gasped, flustered and embarrassed. Emily rushed over, paper towels in hand. "It's okay, sweetie," she said, kneeling beside the boy. "No big deal. You're safe." The little boy looked up at her with the kind of wide, innocent eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Are you sad?" he asked. It stopped her. She blinked. "What? Are you sad inside?" He repeated, his voice soft. "Jesus said you don't have to be anymore." The mother shushed him quickly, embarrassed again, apologizing, but Emily just stared at him, mouth slightly open. "It's okay," she whispered. "Thank you." The boy returned to his pancakes like nothing had happened. Emily stood slowly, heart pounding again, but differently now. First the note, then the lipstick. Now a child with a message. Was she losing it, or was something real unfolding? The rest of the shift blurred. She spilled iced tea on a sheriff's boot. She forgot to punch in an order, but none of it mattered, because beneath it all was a question that wouldn't let her go. Why her? Why would someone go to such lengths to tell her she wasn't forgotten? When her shift ended, she grabbed her coat, stepped outside into the fading sun, and pulled out her phone. She typed his name. Jonathan Roumie, the search bar filled with videos, sermons behind, the scenes clips, interviews. She clicked one at random. He was speaking at a church somewhere in Texas, and there it was again. "If you're broken, that's okay," he said on the screen, his voice calm and strong. Jesus didn't come for the perfect. He came for the ones who cry themselves to sleep. The ones who feel invisible, he came for you. Her breath caught. That night she didn't cry in the freezer. She cried in her car. Long, quiet tears that had been waiting for years to fall. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel ashamed of them. She felt, known, seen, loved, not forgotten, just like the message had said, just like the mirror had echoed, just like the child had confirmed. And in the stillness of that parked car, with the windows fogged up and the world still spinning outside her door, Emily whispered 4 trembling words that would begin to rewrite her life. "Okay, God, I'm listening." Emily woke up the next morning different, not transformed, not healed, not glowing like they show in the movies, just cracked open in the quietest way. The note, the mirror, the little boy's words, they had turned her world from gray static into something almost breathing. Like her soul had been wrapped in gauze for years, and someone had finally peeled a corner back, letting air in. She drove to work slowly that day, letting every red light linger, watching people on sidewalks, wondering how many of them were secretly carrying notes written by God that they hadn't read yet. The morning shift was slow. The regulars came in with their newspapers and their "don't talk to me before coffee" mugs. Emily moved through her tasks, but her eyes kept scanning the diner like it was holding its breath. Just before 11, the bell above the door jingled, and in walked a man she'd never seen before. All broad-shouldered, a faded army jacket and a deep scar running from his ear to the edge of his jaw. He didn't look up when she greeted him, just nodded and slid into the far booth, the one that always stayed empty because the vent above it blew too cold. He ordered eggs over hard and black coffee with a voice so low it almost didn't make it across the table. She scribbled it down, but something in his face stayed with her. He wasn't rude. He was locked up, walled off, like a fortress nobody had tried to breach in a long time. She delivered his plate with the usual smile, but he didn't touch the food for a while. Just stared out the window with a hollow look that made her think of war movies and funeral homes. Then, 20 minutes later, when she came to refill his coffee, she noticed something under his plate. A dog tag, scuffed bent, still looped on its broken chain. She picked it up gently and set it on the table. "You dropped this," she said softly. The man finally looked at her, and for the first time she saw his eyes, wet red, rimmed like sleep hadn't been kind in years. "Didn't drop it," he said, "left it." Emily hesitated, unsure whether to push or walk away. Why? He stared at the tag like it had betrayed him. "Because it's the only thing that still thinks I'm worth remembering." She swallowed hard. Something about those words hit her in the chest. She reached into her apron pocket and, without fully understanding why, pulled out the folded receipt, the one Jonathan Roumie had written on. "Can I show you something?" she asked. The man didn't move, but he didn't stop her either. She unfolded the paper, smoothed it out, and set it in front of him. He read the 7 words slowly, lips moving. "You're seen, you're loved, you're not forgotten." He stared at the words like they'd been written just for him. "Someone left that for me 2 days ago," Emily said quietly, "and now I think maybe they left it for you too." The man's jaw clenched. He pushed his plate aside, untouched, and closed his eyes. A long silence followed. Then he whispered, almost like he was praying, "I didn't think God still talked to people." Emily sat down across from him, no longer caring if other tables needed her. "Maybe he does," she said. "Maybe we just stopped listening." He didn't argue. He just sat there, trembling slightly, the note still in his hand. "My name's Joe," he said after a long pause. "Army medic. I saw things I can't unsee, did things I wish I hadn't. I walk around invisible, can't even look my sister in the eye anymore." Emily leaned in, her voice steady. "You're not invisible, not to God." Joe's lip quivered. He folded the note like it was sacred and placed it in the front pocket of his jacket. "Do you believe this?" he asked, voice breaking. "Most days I don't," she admitted. "But today I do. That night, after closing, she found another message, not in lipstick this time, but carved gently into the wood under the table where Joe had sat. "Thank you for seeing me." Emily ran her fingers over the etching and felt her throat tighten. The ripple from Jonathan's simple message had reached another soul, maybe even saved one. She smiled, wiped a tear, and whispered toward the empty booth, "You're welcome, Joe." 3 days had passed since Joe left that message carved beneath the booth, and Emily hadn't stopped thinking about him. She'd looked for him every morning since, half hoping he'd return, half fearing he wouldn't. The little receipt note still lived in her apron pocket, smoothed out now from constant unfolding and rereading, like scripture she didn't know how to quote but couldn't forget. The days felt different, like she was seeing things in layers now, not just tired customers and spilled ketchup, but broken hearts hiding in plain sight. It made everything heavier and holier. Friday morning, rain tapped against the diner windows like fingers on glass, soft but steady. The place was quiet, the kind of slow lull that gave her time to notice details, the crack in the corner tile, the hum of ceiling fan, the look in people's eyes when they thought no one was watching. Around 10:20, just as she was wiping down the counter, she saw something strange near the register. A plain white envelope, no name, no markings, just sitting there, almost like it had been placed on purpose. She looked around. The booths were mostly empty, only a mother with 2 kids in the back and an old man reading the newspaper up front. No one seemed to be paying attention. She picked it up. It wasn't sealed, just folded carefully. Inside was a note, written in that same scratchy handwriting from before. Same kind Jonathan Roumie had left on the receipt. But this time the message was longer. It read, "If you're still wondering whether God sees you, here's your answer. He does, every second, every tear. Every time you think you're alone, He's already there. You don't have to earn His love. You just have to receive it." Emily blinked. Her breath caught somewhere between her ribs. Was it him? Had he come back? She rushed to the front door and peered outside. The sidewalk was slick with rain, but no one was there. Just a delivery van down the block and a jogger with headphones. Her heart thudded. It felt impossible. But then again, the past few days had shattered her understanding of what impossible meant. She tucked the note into her apron, right beside the original receipt, and whispered, "Okay, God." "I hear you, but the story didn't end there." That afternoon, near the end of her shift, an elderly woman came in short, gray curls tucked under a rain bonnet, eyes bright and curious. She walked with a limp and used a purple cane that matched her lipstick. Emily seated her near the window. "You look like you've seen an angel," the woman said after Emily brought her tea. Emily laughed softly, something like that. The woman leaned in, whispering like they were sharing a secret. "Well, sometimes angels don't have wings. Sometimes they wear aprons and forget they're the answer to someone's prayer." Emily stared at her, stunned. Do I know you?" "Not yet," the woman said with a wink, "but I've been praying for someone like you." As the woman sipped her tea, she began talking. About grace, about love, about how God uses the unnoticed to do the unforgettable. She spoke of pain and healing like someone who had known both deeply. Her name was Mabel. She had lost her husband, her son, and most of her retirement to cancer treatments and hospital bills, but her spirit glowed with something more powerful than sadness. "I came in today because I felt a nudge," she said. "Didn't plan on it. Just felt pulled. And now I know why." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small paper heart hand, cut and crinkled at the edges. On it, in shaky cursive, were 5 words, "God isn't finished with you." Mabel pressed it into Emily's hand. "Pass it on, sweetheart," she said, "to the next one who forgets." Emily didn't know whether to cry or laugh, so she did a little of both. That night, as she locked up the diner and stood in the empty dining room, she looked around at the booths, the windows, the place that had felt so ordinary just a week ago. It wasn't ordinary anymore. It was a sacred echo chamber of whispers and wounds and wonders. She looked down at the heart in her palm, then up at the ceiling. God, she whispered, I think I'm starting to get it. And somewhere deep inside, she sensed an answer, not in thunder, not in a voice, but in a quiet warmth that wrapped around her like a promise. This is just the beginning. Saturday brought a strange energy with it, like the world had tilted slightly and no one else noticed but her. Emily arrived at the diner just before sunrise, the sky outside still bruised purple and gray, the streets wet with fog. She unlocked the front door, turned the open sign, and did something she hadn't done in years. She prayed. Just a few whispered words over the coffee pots and countertop. Whatever you're doing, don't stop. The shift started slow. A couple of truckers came through, tired and polite. An elderly man argued with the jukebox again. Normalcy wrapped around the place like an old quilt, but underneath it, Emily felt the hum, the same low, electric hum that had followed her all week. She carried it like a secret. Around 9:30, the bell above the door chimed, and in walked a woman Emily had never seen. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with nervous eyes and hair that looked slept on. She wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big, and clutched a canvas backpack to her chest like it held her last lifeline. Emily greeted her with a smile, but the woman didn't return it. She just nodded and slid into the corner booth where Joe had once etched his thanks. Emily brought her coffee, black, menu. The woman shook her head, just this. Her voice was quiet, brittle. Emily nodded and walked away, but something about the girl pulled at her. She kept glancing over between orders, watching as the woman stared out the window like she was searching for something to give her permission to stay. When Emily came to refill the coffee, the girl finally spoke. You ever feel like disappearing? The question landed like a stone in Emily's chest. She sat down without asking. Yeah, she said, more than once. The girl nodded slowly, then looked away. I almost didn't come in. I was gonna keep walking. I don't even know why I stopped. Emily thought for a moment. Then she reached into her apron and pulled out the little paper heart Mabel had given her. God isn't finished with you. It read in faded cursive. Someone gave this to me. Emily said, sliding it across the table. I think it's yours. Now the girl stared at it for a long moment, like it was the first real thing she'd seen in days. Her lip trembled. She folded her arms tightly across her chest. I was gonna go to the bridge, she whispered, not the diner. The bridge? Emily's breath hitched. What stopped you? The girl looked down at the paper heart, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. This place, the name, Maggie's Diner. She sniffed. Maggie was my mom's name. She died last year. I don't know. I just saw it and thought. Maybe. Emily reached across the table and took the girl's hand. Maybe is all you need. For a long moment the two sat there, strangers bound by brokenness, and the tiny thread of hope passed down through unlikely messengers. Finally the girl said, My name's Kayla. Hi, Kayla. Emily whispered. You're not alone. After Kayla left, clutching the heart like an anchor, Emily walked into the kitchen, leaned against the sink, and finally let herself breathe. The ripple was growing. What had started with one man's note had reached another heart, and now another, and each one brought its own quiet miracle. She didn't know how or why Jonathan Roumie had written those 7 words. She didn't know if he would ever come back, but the effect was undeniable. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the old grocery store across the street, the bell above the door jingled again, and for the briefest moment, Emily's breath caught. There, standing in the doorway with a quiet smile and the same worn leather jacket, was Jonathan Roumie. For a moment, Emily couldn't move. Jonathan Roumie stood in the doorway like a quiet echo of something sacred, the same calm in his eyes, the same worn jacket that had brushed past her on that first day when he left the note that wrecked her, in the best way. He stepped forward slowly, the diner behind him swallowing the outside noise, and he smiled when he saw her, not a celebrity smile, not an actor smile, a smile that said, I remember you. Emily blinked fast, her hands suddenly unsure of what to do. Wipe a table. Pour coffee, collapse. She settled for walking toward him. You came back. she said, voice low, as if too much volume might break the moment. He looked around the diner, took in the booths, the counter, the scent of fresh bacon and burned toast. "Something told me I should," he said. "Looks like this place has been busy with more than just orders." Emily let out a shaky laugh. "You could say that." She gestured toward the corner booth, and he nodded, walking to it like someone returning to a sacred place. She poured 2 mugs of coffee, though he hadn't asked, and sat across from him without hesitation. "You started something," she said, "that note, those words." She reached into her apron pocket and unfolded the worn receipt, now faded at the corners. "It hasn't left me, it's changed everything." Jonathan studied her, his expression gentle but searching. "Tell me." So she did. She told him about Joe, the scarred soldier who'd left a thank you carved in wood. About the lipstick message in the bathroom mirror. About the envelope by the register, the girl named Kayla, who had been walking toward a bridge instead of pancakes, and how a paper heart had kept her from disappearing. Jonathan didn't interrupt once. He just listened, eyes soft, hands wrapped around his coffee like he was holding something fragile. When she finished, she sat back, exhaled, and asked the question that had been burning in her since the moment he walked back through the door. "Was it you, the envelope, the mirror, the girl who got the heart? I mean, how?" He smiled, not with secrets but with peace. "No," he said gently, "I only left one note, that day on your check." He reached into his own jacket and pulled out a folded copy of the original message. "You're seen. You're loved, you're not forgotten," written again in his handwriting, but when you hand light to someone else. He continued, "You don't control how far it spreads. That's not our job. Our job is just to say yes when God whispers this one." Emily stared at him, overwhelmed. "So it really was just one moment, just one," he said, "but look what it did." They sat in silence then, not awkward but holy, the kind of silence where you don't need to fill the space because God already has. After a while, Jonathan leaned in. "Emily, there are a lot of people who walk through this world thinking they're invisible. But when you believed that message was for you, you made it real, for you, and for everyone else you gave it to." Emily nodded slowly. "I didn't even know I had anything to give. None of us do," he said, "until we let God break us open. Then we find we're full of things the world is starving for." She looked at him then, really looked, and realized something. He hadn't come back for credit. He hadn't come to see how viral the story had gone, or if anyone had recognized him. He'd come because sometimes the messenger needs to see that the message mattered. "You know," she said softly, "if you hadn't come back, I don't know if I would have had the courage to keep going." Jonathan smiled again, a little sad this time. "That's the thing about grace. It keeps going even when we don't." He stood up, reaching for his wallet. Emily stopped him. "No, this one's on me." He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He just nodded, folded the note once more, and tucked it beside the receipt in her pocket. "Pass it on," he said. And with that, Jonathan turned and walked out the door, leaving behind the scent of coffee, a heart wide open, and the quiet knowing that the story wasn't over, it was just beginning again. Emily didn't sleep that night, not out of restlessness, but awe. After Jonathan left, she sat in the empty booth where he'd first written the note, watching the rain slide down the diner windows like the whole world had softened somehow. His words played over and over in her mind. "Our job is just to say yes." It rang like a bell inside her. Not a command, but a calling. The next morning, she arrived an hour early, something she'd never done in 6 years of punching that greasy time clock. The diner was still dark, chairs up on tables, fryer cold. But she moved with purpose. First, she took an old mason jar from the shelf, cleaned it until it gleamed, and taped a folded index card to the front. 3 words, Han, written in her best penmanship: "Take what you need." Not a tip jar, not a donation request, just an open invitation, grace in glass. She placed it near the register, beside the stack of to-go menus, and then she waited. At first, no one noticed. People came and went, ordering their usuals, heads buried in their phones, eyes glazed over by routine. But around 11:15, a young man in a hoodie hesitated near the counter. He had come in for coffee, but stood staring at the jar for a long minute. Then, quietly, he slipped 2 wrinkled dollar bills from the jar, not with guilt, but reverence, and walked out with a steaming cup and eyes a little less tired. Emily didn't say a word. She just smiled. By the end of the day, the jar was half full, half empty, depending on how you looked at it. And that was the point. People were giving and taking freely, no shame, no questions, just quiet exchanges of need and generosity, passing hands like sacred currency. And it wasn't just money. Someone left a bus token, someone else a post-it with the words "You're stronger than yesterday." By day 3, the jar had become its own kind of ministry, drawing stories out of people who had never said more than scrambled, no toast. A widow left a hand, knit glove, and a note that read, "I made these for my husband before he passed. Maybe someone else is cold now." A teenager slipped in a drawing of a lion with the words, "Don't quit. The fight is holy." Emily collected the notes each night, kept them in a shoebox beneath the register. She didn't know why, only that they mattered, that they were becoming something. One afternoon, Mabel returned, the older woman with the purple cane and lipstick like royalty. She walked straight to the jar, looked it over with approving eyes, and chuckled. "Well, look at you," she said. "Didn't I tell you angels wear aprons?" Emily hugged her this time, not out of politeness but gratitude. "It's happening, Mabel," she whispered. "People are waking up." Mabel tapped her cane on the floor. "They're remembering," she said. "Sometimes all it takes is one candle to remind the dark it doesn't win." That night, Emily added a new note to the jar herself. "No money, just a message. If you feel like giving up, please talk to me first. I've been there." She signed it only with her name. She wasn't trying to be heroic. She just didn't want anyone to sit alone with the kind of silence that almost swallowed her last year. And the next morning, she found an envelope taped to the door, addressed in messy ink, for Emily. Inside was a letter, just one paragraph. "I almost did, last night, but I read your note, and I cried until the sun came up. I didn't know strangers could care like that. Thank you. You saved someone without even knowing it." Emily folded the letter, pressed it to her chest, and cried, right there behind the counter, apron still stained with syrup and hope. The jar stayed, the notes multiplied, the ripple grew, and Emily finally understood. Jonathan's message wasn't the end of a story, it was the seed. What she'd read on that check was never meant to be a moment. It was meant to be a movement. It started with a teenage boy named Illy who came into the diner alone on a Wednesday morning, the hood of his sweatshirt pulled over his head, earbuds in, hands in his pockets like he was bracing for impact. He didn't order anything at first, just sat in the far booth and stared at the table, silent, still, like maybe he was hoping to disappear. Emily noticed immediately, not just because he looked out of place, but because he looked like she used to feel, like someone waiting for a sign that the world wasn't finished with him yet. She poured a mug of coffee, slid a plate of toast beside it, and placed a folded note on the side. No charge, no pressure. The note read, "You matter more than you know." She didn't expect him to say anything. Most people didn't. But when she passed by 15 minutes later, the toast was gone, the coffee was cold, and the note had been carefully unfolded, smoothed out, and placed right in the center of the table like a prayer. The next day Illy returned. This time he brought a friend. The day after that, 2 more came, shoulders slouched, eyes wary, backpacks slung low, like kids trying to stay invisible. Emily fed them quietly, no questions asked. She left notes each time. Some were verses she remembered from childhood, some just truth scribbled in ink. "You are not a mistake. God's not done writing your story. You're not too broken to be loved." Then something unexpected happened. One of the boys left a note behind. then another, then 5 more. Emily found them tucked into napkin dispensers, under salt shakers, even taped to the bathroom mirror like love letters for the next person to find. One morning, a note appeared on the counter, written in a girl's careful cursive. "I was going to end it tonight. Then I read your wall." Emily looked up and realized what had happened. Someone had started pinning the notes to the bulletin board near the restroom. By now it was full. Dozens of folded scraps, torn receipts, sticky notes and index cards, messages of pain, of healing, of survival, words like "he sees you," and "you're still here, and that's a miracle." It wasn't just teenagers anymore. Truckers, waitresses, single moms, struggling dads, they all started leaving pieces of their story behind. The wall became its own kind of chapel, raw, unpolished, but sacred. Emily added a sign above it, simple and hand-painted, the letter wall, "Take what you need, leave what you can." It became the heartbeat of Maggie's diner. People came from across town just to read the messages. A local reporter showed up one Thursday with a camera and a notepad, asking if he could feature the diner in a column. Emily hesitated at first. This wasn't about publicity. This was holy ground. But the man promised to write it as a story of hope, not spectacle. The article ran in the Sunday paper under the headline, "Grace in a Coffee Cup. The diner where strangers save each other." A week later, letters began arriving in the mail, dozens of them, then hundreds, from all over the country. Handwritten envelopes with return addresses from Kentucky, Oregon, Idaho, even Alaska. Inside were stories. Notes, prayers. People wrote about addiction, about losing everything, about finding a shred of hope in a photograph of the wall someone had shared online. Emily read every single one. She cried through most. She posted what she could, carefully pinning the letters beside the local ones, expanding the wall onto the adjacent panel, and then another. Soon they were stapling messages to cork boards, taping them to the front counter, covering the windows like stained glass made of pain and healing. The walls of Maggie's began to speak, not with sermons, but with stories. One night, as Emily closed up, she stood in the middle of the diner, alone except for the ghostly hum of the refrigerator and the soft glow of the letter-covered walls. She thought of the day it all began, the receipt, the message, the man who had no idea he was starting a revival in a place that smelled like bacon and burned coffee. She pulled out her phone and opened her messages. She didn't have Jonathan's number, but she had his public contact form, the one people used to book speaking engagements and fan appearances. She didn't know what to say, so she simply typed, "You came in for coffee. You left behind a miracle. The ripple hasn't stopped." Then she attached a photo, a wide shot of the diner, every wall covered in letters of grace and second chances. And then she hit send. Jonathan was sitting alone in his New York apartment when the email arrived. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the kind where city noise fades behind closed windows and the streetlights blink like tired eyes. He'd just finished recording a voiceover for a nonprofit campaign, his tea gone cold beside him, when he casually refreshed his inbox and saw the subject line, "You left behind a miracle." At first, he thought it was fan mail, another thank you message for his portrayal of Jesus on screen. He received dozens like it every week, but something about the wording made him pause. He clicked. The email was short, no dramatic build-up, no long explanation. Just a few sentences from someone named Emily Carter at Maggie's diner. She wrote about the note, the day he came in, the 7 words he scribbled on the check, and how, from that one seed, something unspeakably beautiful had grown. Attached was a single image, the inside of a small town diner with its walls covered in hundreds of handwritten letters. Prayers, confessions, encouragements, desperation, hope. It took Jonathan a full minute to breathe. He clicked the photo open, full screen. The resolution was a little blurry, but the message was crystal clear. Every inch of wall space was alive with words, like a mosaic of redemption. He leaned closer and noticed one scrap near the middle, a familiar phrase in a familiar hand: "You're seen, you're loved, you're not forgotten." His original message still there, still working. He sat back in his chair, stunned, not by the scale of what had happened, but by how little it took to spark it. Just 7 words, just a moment of obedience. He thought of the day he walked into that diner, how unremarkable it had seemed. He had no plan, no great gesture. He'd just felt a nudge, leave a note, say what needed to be said. Now here it was echoing through strangers, stitched into napkins and receipts and torn notebook pages. Grace, moving through paper and pain. He reread Emily's email 3 more times before replying. His fingers hovered over the keys, unsure how to answer a miracle. Finally he typed, "Dear Emily, I have no words, only awe. I never imagined God would use something so small to do something so holy. Please know this, what you've built is no longer just a diner, it's a sanctuary, and you've become the pastor of it. I'd love to come back, if you'll have me." He pressed send and leaned back, overcome. For the first time in months he wept, not out of sorrow or exhaustion, but gratitude, the kind that comes when you realize heaven used your hands when you weren't even looking. 2 days later, Emily opened the reply during her lunch break, standing beside the register as the jar sat quietly behind her, now labeled the Grace jar. She covered her mouth, blinking back tears. "He's coming back," she whispered. She looked around the diner, at Kayla laughing softly in the corner with a regular, at Joe wiping down a table without being asked, at Mabel in her usual spot, knitting with her purple cane beside her. She didn't know when he'd arrive or how long he'd stay, but she knew one thing for certain. When the messenger returned, he would find the message still alive, still growing, still saving people 1 note at a time. The diner was fuller than it had ever been, but it wasn't loud. It was reverent. Something sacred hung in the air like candlelight, even though the only glow came from the morning sun spilling through the windows and the silver of coffee pots reflecting it. The letter wall was overflowing now, papers taped onto papers, stapled across ceiling beams, even folded into origami hearts hanging from string. Word had spread far beyond the town. What began as a whispered ripple had become a quiet revival, 1 paper prayer at a time. And at the center of it all, standing beside booth 9 like he'd never left, was Jonathan Roumie. He had arrived early, slipping in through the side door just after sunrise. No cameras, no fanfare, just him, a flannel shirt, and the look of a man returning to a place where God had spoken. Emily had been at the register when she saw him, and her breath had caught, not because of his fame, but because this time she knew exactly who he was. Not an actor, not a guest, but the man whose obedience sparked her resurrection. She greeted him with a hug this time, not a notepad, no menu, just welcome. "You look like this place was waiting for you." She whispered, "Feels like it." He said. They sat at the same booth, across from each other again, and this time Emily brought the coffee without asking. "Black, right?" She smiled. He nodded. "You remembered. Hard to forget the man who set my whole life on fire with 7 words. They talked for an hour, maybe more. He listened as she told him what had happened since he left. The jar, the kids, the broken, the healed. He asked about Joe, about Kayla, about the letters. He read some of them carefully, quietly. One simply said, "I haven't used in 47 days. I think I'm worth something again." Another, "My wife left. I came here to drink coffee and cry. Someone left me a Bible verse in a sugar packet. It changed everything." Jonathan's eyes were wet as he read them. These people, they're preaching better sermons than I ever could. "They're just telling the truth," Emily said. "And the truth's contagious." He looked at her then, more serious. "You know this is a ministry now, right?" She swallowed. "Yeah, I'm starting to believe that. You ever thought about taking it further, maybe, sharing this somewhere?" She shook her head. "I'm just a waitress." "Not anymore," he said. "Now you're a messenger." She didn't respond right away, but deep down something said yes. As Jonathan stood to leave, she instinctively reached for the bill, forgetting for a moment who he was. "Oh, wait," she said, laughing. "I guess this one's on you again." "Actually," he said, scribbling something on the back of the receipt, "this time it's for you." He slid the folded check across the table, winked, and left without another word. Emily didn't open it right away. She carried it with her all day, tucked in her apron, through lunch rush, through spilled coffee, through a kid's birthday pancake disaster. Finally, after closing, she sat alone in booth 9, the lights dimmed, the chairs up, and slowly unfolded the check. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a message from actor to waitress. It was something more. On the back, in his familiar handwriting, he had written, "This story started with 7 words. Now it ends with just 3. Keep it going." Below that, he had taped a $1 bill. Just one, ordinary in every way, except for what it symbolized, seed money, a reminder, a passing torch. Emily pressed the check to her chest and smiled through tears. She looked around at the diner, her sanctuary, her calling, her congregation, the place where weary people met love over coffee and toast. She folded the check, placed it in a frame, and hung it on the wall above the register, right beside the mason jar. Beneath it, she taped a new note written in her own hand this time: "You're seen, you're loved, you're not forgotten." The same 7 words that changed her life, the same 7 she would keep giving away for as long as someone needed them.